there's a kind of tiredness that runs deeper than lack of sleep. It's not in your body, it's somewhere in your soul. It's that quiet exhaustion that comes from always needing to be understood. You explain why you said that, why you felt this way, why you couldn't be there, why you were quiet, why you changed your mind. And after a while, you start to notice something. The more you explain, the less understood you actually feel. We grow up being taught that explaining ourselves is the right thing to do, that it keeps peace, prevents misunderstanding, shows respect. But over time, that habit becomes something else. It becomes a cage. You start to realize that the constant need to justify every little thing isn't kindness anymore, it's fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of being rejected. Fear of not being enough as you are. You may not even notice when it starts. Maybe it began when you were a child. When someone told you to stop crying because it's not that bad. Or when you tried to share something that hurt, and you were told to get over it. Slowly, you learned that your feelings were too much, that your reactions were wrong, that your thoughts had to be explained to make sense to others. So you started to translate yourself piece by piece into something more acceptable. At first, it seems harmless. You just want to be understood. You want peace. But little by little, something inside starts to fade. You stop trusting your own emotions. You start asking, is this okay to feel? Instead of just feeling. You start questioning if your boundaries are too harsh, if your needs are too demanding, if your silence is too distant. You start doubting yourself, and that's where the real exhaustion comes from. When you constantly explain yourself, what you're really saying without words is, please don't leave me because of who I am. You're trying to buy acceptance by offering pieces of your truth. And the cost is always the same. Your peace. The more you try to make everyone understand you, the less you understand yourself. Because each explanation pulls you away from your own center. From that quiet, solid part of you that simply knows what feels right. You begin to live on the surface, scanning other people's reactions, adjusting your tone, choosing your words carefully so you won't be misunderstood. You end up performing your life instead of living it. But there's a beautiful, terrifying turning point the moment you finally stop explaining. At first, it feels wrong. You might feel guilty, even selfish. The silence that follows feels uncomfortable, almost unbearable. You'll want to fill it with words to fix what others might be thinking. But if you stay in that silence long enough, something powerful begins to grow in it. A kind of peace you haven't felt in years. You start realizing that not everyone needs to understand you, and that's okay. You learn that being misunderstood doesn't mean you did something wrong. You start to notice how much energy you've been wasting on trying to control how others see you. And slowly, you reclaim that energy. You start using it to listen to yourself again. When you stop explaining yourself, you begin to stand differently, not physically, but emotionally. There's a quiet confidence that settles in. You don't feel the need to justify your choices, your feelings, or your silence. You don't shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You start showing up exactly as you are, unedited, unapologetic, real. Of course, not everyone will like this version of you. Some people will be uncomfortable. They might say, you've changed. They might call you distant or cold. But the truth is, you've simply stopped living in the way that benefits them. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop being easy to control. You stop feeding dynamics that depend on your guilt or insecurity. And that shift will always reveal who was truly there for you, and who was only there because you were easy to manage. Silence, when it comes from strength, is one of the most powerful things in the world. It's not the silence that hides or avoids, it's the silence that stands. It says, I don't owe you an explanation for existing. That kind of silence unsettles people who expect you to bow, to defend, to prove. But for the first time, your silence isn't empty, it's full. Full of self-respect, full of presence. And yes, it's not easy. you'll feel the urge to go back to explain again, to make things smooth, to keep everyone comfortable. Your old self will whisper, "Say something, they'll misunderstand you." But that voice isn't your truth, it's your fear. The part of you that believes love is conditional, that you need to earn acceptance. When you resist that impulse and stay silent, you start teaching yourself something new, that you are safe even when not understood. And that's when everything begins to shift. Because real peace doesn't come from being understood, it comes from understanding yourself. When you stop explaining, you begin to hear your own voice again. You realize that your emotions don't need permission, your choices don't need defense, and your life doesn't need to be constantly translated for others to approve. You start living differently. You say no without giving 10 reasons why. You rest when you're tired without apologizing for it. You walk away from conversations that drain you without explaining what's wrong. You stop performing your boundaries and start living them. And with every time you choose silence over explanation, something deep inside strengthens your sense of self. Soon, that energy you once spent on explaining turns into clarity, into calm. You feel lighter. You stop walking on eggshells. You start trusting your own feelings again, even when no one else understands them. You begin to realize that you don't have to convince anyone to believe you. You simply know what's true for you, and that's enough. And here's something beautiful. When you stop trying to make everyone understand you, the right people begin to, without effort, without translation, because authenticity has its own language. When you are real, people who value truth recognize it instantly. Your silence becomes magnetic. You start attracting connections that are built on honesty, not convenience. But perhaps the most powerful change happens inside. The way you look at yourself begins to soften. You stop judging your emotions as right or wrong. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You start to see that your worth was never supposed to depend on someone else's understanding of you. It was meant to live quietly inside you all along. And once that realization sinks in, life feels different. The noise outside matters less. The opinions lose their weight. You start living from the inside out, guided not by how others respond, but by how true something feels to you. When you stop explaining yourself, you don't become cold or disconnected. You become whole and peaceful. You begin to live with a kind of quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be felt. You learn to say less but mean more. You stop chasing clarity from others because you've already found it within. And it changes everything, not because the world suddenly understands you, but because you no longer need it to. You don't shrink when someone misreads you. You don't rush to fix misunderstandings. You simply allow them to exist. Because you finally trust that the truth, your truth, doesn't disappear just because someone else can't see it. There's a certain kind of freedom that comes when you stop explaining yourself. It's the freedom of breathing deeply again, of not carrying the weight of everyone's expectations on your shoulders. It's the peace of knowing that your worth no longer depends on how convincing you can be. And that freedom changes the energy around you. People start responding differently. Not because you've become louder or more assertive, but because there's something unshakable about someone who knows who they are. You no longer seek respect or ask to be seen. You simply are. So the next time you feel that urge to explain, pause. You don't owe anyone a defense for being yourself. You don't need to justify your feelings, your boundaries, your choices. You are allowed to be exactly as you are, without footnotes, without apology. And maybe that's where real confidence begins. Not in how well you can make people understand you, but in how deeply you understand yourself. Because when you stop explaining yourself, the noise fades, the anxiety quiets, and what remains is something unshakable, a simple, steady truth. You are enough, even in silence.